The night sky has always been our oldest companion. Long before we learned to measure distance or calculate orbits, we simply looked upward and felt something stir, a quiet awe, a wordless recognition that we were part of something vast and unending. The stars became our first teachers. Their silent shimmer, a kind of cosmic language we could almost understand if we only stared long enough. And among those endless points of light, a few moved differently, drifting, gliding, whispering that not everything above us was fixed. It is within this silent ocean of darkness that one particular shadow has lingered, unseen by most, yet whispered about for generations. Some call it the Black Knight satellite, an object said to circle our planet in an orbit older than any known human creation. Its story drifts between myth and evidence, between science and imagination, like a signal just at the edge of static. For decades, people have wondered whether something or someone has been watching us from above, silently, patiently, as we learned to look up. But before we reach into those theories, before we chase radar echoes and decode radio transmissions, let us start here with the feeling itself. Imagine you are outside on a still, cloudless night. The air is cool, gentle, and steady. Above, the stars hang like frozen sparks in the dark. Somewhere beyond them, invisible to the eye, an object glides across the sky. Not a satellite we launched, not a fragment of metal from our machines, but something older, something that has been there long before we learned to listen. For some, the story began with a whisper in a laboratory. In the late 19th century, when radio was still a dream, a young inventor named Nikola Tesla sat alone with his coils and instruments. Listening to the invisible hum of the earth, he believed he could hear signals, rhythmic pulses, too structured to be random, coming from the stars themselves. Tesla spoke of communication, of patterns that might have been messages. The scientific world called it imagination. Yet, decades later, others would hear similar echoes, and they too would wonder, was it just the atmosphere? Or was something trying to reach us? That idea would never quite die. It moved quietly through the decades, a secret curiosity passed from one thinker to another. And as humanity's eyes grew sharper, as telescopes became stronger and radar swept the heavens, strange things began to appear in our data. Objects that shouldn't be there. Shadows that moved where nothing should move. Unexplained echoes that bounced back from the void. It was then that the name Black Knight began to take shape, part rumor, part reverence, part warning. A mysterious satellite said to orbit the Earth in a path no known spacecraft could take, following neither our modern satellites nor the debris we left behind. Some claimed it had been detected before the space age even began. Others said its orbit was polar, an impossible trajectory for our early rockets. And so the whispers grew of an ancient object, a relic not made by human hands. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the way the story moves, not with the rush of conspiracy, but with the quiet rhythm of something older, slower, more patient, like the moon's pull on the tides. The idea of the Black Knight moves through our collective imagination, shaping our dreams and doubts in equal measure. It is easy to dismiss such things. After all, the night sky has always been a mirror for our hopes and fears. We see meaning in its stillness, faces in its patterns, prophecy in its movements. But even skeptics will admit the Black Knight legend persists because it feels like something we should have found by now. It lives at that delicate edge between belief and evidence, between what we know and what we hope might be true. Perhaps that is why it captures us, because the story of the Black Knight is not really about an object in space. It's about the part of us that refuses to stop looking up, about the restless imagination that wonders if we are not alone, if something far older and wiser once placed a sentinel in orbit to watch, to record, or perhaps simply to wait. And so, when you close your eyes and imagine the planet from above, oceans glinting like mirrors, clouds drifting like silk, you might picture a single dark shape moving quietly through the upper atmosphere, unseen by most, indifferent to the noise of our cities below. It passes over continents and oceans, tracing the same silent path night after night, its shadow crossing deserts and mountains, its presence unnoticed except by a few who listen. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a piece of space debris, a lost signal, a trick of reflection. But maybe, just maybe, it's something that has been there since before we began counting time. Something that remembers, something that waits. The truth, as always, is layered. In the next moments, we will drift backward in time to Tesla's lab, to early radio operators straining to hear the stars, to the first radar technicians who saw blips where there should have been none. The story of the Black Knight begins not in outer space, but in human curiosity, that endless pull to know, to find, to understand. So as you listen, breathe deeply. Let the sound of your own heart beat slow. Let your thoughts stretch out across the dark horizon. Somewhere far above you, a shadow moves timeless, indifferent, eternal. And perhaps, as the world sleeps, it listens to, as the story of the Black Knight unfolds. It draws us into a strange crossroad between invention and imagination, a place where science meets myth and refuses to let go. For many, it begins with Nikola Tesla in 1899, sitting alone in his Colorado Springs laboratory, surrounded by the faint crackle of electricity and the hum of the earth itself. Tesla believed he was listening to more than static. Through his coils and receivers, he claimed to have heard rhythmic pulses, deliberate, repeating, mathematical patterns that seemed to carry intent. He wrote of these signals with excitement and mystery, suggesting they might have come from beyond our planet. I have a deep conviction, he wrote, that intelligent beings are attempting to communicate with us. To his contemporaries, it sounded like fantasy. But years later, when technology caught up with his vision, the patterns he described would resurface in the form of unexplained echoes, signals that behaved unlike anything known to physics at the time. These became known as long-delayed echoes, or LDEs, radio transmissions that bounced back to Earth several seconds after being sent, delayed far longer than normal reflections could explain. The phenomenon was documented again and again in the 1920s and 1930s. Engineers, scientists, and radio operators around the world confirmed it. They would transmit a signal, and seconds later it would return faint, distorted, and impossible to trace. For a while, researchers tried to explain it through ionospheric reflections or magnetic interference. But the delays, sometimes up to 15 seconds, defied those explanations. Something else was at play, and no one could quite say what. It was around this time that whispers began. Perhaps something in orbit was bouncing those signals back, something metallic, intelligent, and ancient. By the 1950s, the Cold War had transformed the night sky into a stage for surveillance. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to send satellites into orbit. Every radar sweep, every radio ping was watched closely. It was in this heightened atmosphere that new reports began to surface. Mysterious objects seen circling the Earth long before Sputnik, moving in orbits no human technology could yet achieve. In 1954, newspapers began printing curious headlines. Artificial satellite is sighted above Earth. Experts mystified. The stories spoke of an object orbiting in a polar trajectory, something our technology at the time could not accomplish. One report even cited the U.S. Air Force, suggesting that this object had been tracked for weeks, silent and steady, its path unlike any known debris or meteor. To many, it sounded like proof that Tesla had heard something real, proof that the LDEs were not natural phenomena but responses, echoes from an intelligence monitoring us from above. The idea took hold. There was something up there, circling the Earth, ancient and watchful. The name Black Knight would come later, during the 1960s, but its roots were already forming. A guardian in the shadows, an unknown presence watching silently from the edge of space. Scientists dismissed it as misinterpretation, a tangle of unconnected data points. But to those who listened longer, who dared to look deeper, the pattern began to make sense. Among them was Jørgen Hals, a Norwegian engineer, who was one of the first to document long-delayed echoes in 1928. He and others noticed something peculiar. The echoes didn't just return, they seemed to vary in delay in a structured way, as if encoded. Decades later, researchers analyzed these patterns and claimed that the delays, when translated mathematically, mapped out a constellation epsilon boot is dot. It was as if they said, someone was sending a celestial postcard. We are here, skeptics, of course, offered grounded explanations: equipment malfunction, atmospheric scattering, solar storms. Yet none could fully reproduce the effect in controlled conditions. And so the mystery deepened. Each decade added new layers of speculation. Was the object a relic of an ancient civilization, a probe left behind by extraterrestrial visitors, or simply the universe playing tricks on our limited instruments? But perhaps what makes this mystery so captivating is not the data itself, but the way it mirrors our human need for connection. Tesla listened to the stars because he wanted to know if we were alone. Radio operators searched for meaning in the static because they hoped to find a voice answering back. Even now, as our technology grows more sophisticated, the same impulse remains: the quiet longing to be acknowledged by something beyond us. And somewhere, high above, that longing takes shape as the shadow of a satellite no one remembers launching. Photographs taken during early space missions show dark, irregular shapes drifting against the curve of the Earth, shapes that seem mechanical, angular, almost deliberate. NASA called them debris from earlier missions, discarded panels, or thermal blankets. But believers weren't convinced. Some of those photos appeared before such debris should have existed, in a way. It didn't matter whether the object was real or not. By the time the photographs circulated, the legend had already become self-sustaining. Each new image, each unexplained signal, each half-forgotten radar anomaly only deepened the myth. The Black Knight had entered the collective imagination, a phantom satellite circling endlessly, somewhere between science and story. And yet, even myths have roots. What if the story of the Black Knight is not a single event, but an accumulation, fragments of truth scattered across time? Tesla's signals, the long-delayed echoes, the radar anomalies, the strange photographs, each could be a small piece of a larger puzzle. Each a moment when the veil between understanding and mystery grew thin. Perhaps the question is not what the Black Knight is, but why so many have felt compelled to believe in it. Why does the idea of an ancient watcher above our world resonate so deeply? Maybe it's because the night sky, in all its cold silence, still feels alive, as if it's watching us back. And so the story drifts onward, like the satellite itself, timeless, silent, unblinking. We stand beneath it, staring upward, our questions reflected in the same void we've always known. Somewhere between physics and faith, the mystery lingers, patient and unmoved. In the next chapter, we'll move further into the evidence, the photographs, the transmissions, and the testimonies of those who claim to have seen the Black Knight with their own eyes. Each clue adds weight to the question that refuses to fade. If something is up there, who or what put it there? The Black Knight, as it came to be known, is not a single photograph or one strange radio echo. It is an accumulation of whispers that have followed us for over a century. Yet somewhere in that fog of rumor, science, and imagination, there are moments when the noise quiets and the story becomes strangely clear. It begins to feel less like fiction and more like a half-remembered truth. In 1960, the United States Department of Defense announced that it had detected an unidentified object orbiting the Earth. Newspapers across the world ran headline, "Mysterious dark satellite spotted above Earth." The orbit was polar, something no human-made satellite had yet achieved. It circled the Earth once every 104 minutes, silent, steady, and inexplicable. The Pentagon insisted they were investigating. For a few days, the public wondered if this was the same mysterious satellite Tesla and the radio operators had hinted at decades before. A few weeks later, official sources claimed the object had been identified. It was said to be a piece of debris from an earlier mission, a casing, or a fragment of equipment. But those who followed the details noticed inconsistencies. The object was moving faster than expected for debris. Its orbit was unusually stable, and the public statement, quick and dismissive, left more questions than answers. By that point, the legend had taken root. Magazines, science journals, and even television programs began mentioning the Black Knight satellite. Amateur astronomers claimed to have tracked it. Some said a dark shape reflecting sunlight for a brief instant before fading back into invisibility. It became a ghost in the sky, glimpsed but never captured. Then, in 1963, the story took a new turn. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, during his Mercury 9 mission, reported seeing a glowing greenish object that appeared to move against the background of the stars. His radio transmission to mission control was said to have been abruptly cut off, and the official transcript later made no mention of the sighting. NASA attributed it to electrical interference, a malfunction in the onboard systems. Cooper himself, in interviews years later, hinted that there was more to the story, though he was careful with his words. He spoke often about unidentified objects, maintained that astronauts had seen things in space that defied explanation. It's here that the black night mystery deepened, because as human eyes looked upward with more precision than ever before, what they found did not simplify the story. Instead, it made it richer. Radar returns showed echoes where no satellites should have been. Photographs revealed strange shapes. Signals appeared on frequencies not in use by any known satellite. And every time a new explanation was offered, another anomaly would quietly rise to replace it for those who believe the black night is real. These patterns aren't random. They are the slow unveiling of something ancient, something waiting. The theory that emerged suggested that the black night could be a probe, perhaps tens of thousands of years old, placed in Earth's orbit by an advanced civilization. Its purpose, no one could say for sure. Some claimed it was observing us, monitoring the planet's progress. Others thought it was a beacon, transmitting signals into deep space, part of an interstellar network that predated humanity. What made the idea so haunting wasn't just the technology it implied, but the possibility that it had been here all along, before Sputnik, before Apollo, before we even dreamed of leaving the ground. If true, then the Black Knight wasn't just an alien object. It was a silent witness to our evolution, drifting patiently above the same world it once came to watch. Skeptics, of course, argued differently. They pointed to photographs taken during the STS-88 space shuttle mission in 1998, a series of images showing a dark, irregular shape floating against the bright curve of the Earth. These, NASA explained, were pictures of a thermal blanket that had accidentally drifted away from the shuttle during construction of the International Space Station. The object, they said, looked alien only because of lighting and perspective. And yet, those images became some of the most famous ever connected to the Black Knight story. People compared them to earlier radar signatures, to Tesla's mysterious signals, to the LDEs from decades past. The shapes, they argued, were too similar to ignore. Could all of these events, spanning more than a century, be connected by coincidence alone? It's difficult to say where truth ends and interpretation begins. But perhaps that's the point. The Black Knight lives in the space between what we can measure and what we can feel. That quiet border between science and the unknown. It draws strength from uncertainty, feeding on the edges of our understanding, where imagination becomes a kind of observation in itself. Even the skeptics, in their insistence on rational explanations, cannot escape the beauty of the mystery. Because whether the Black Knight is a fragment of metal, a trick of the light, or a relic from another world, it reminds us that there are still places where we are small, where our machines and mathematics can only go so far. It reminds us that the night sky, mapped and catalogued though it may be, still hides shadows that don't quite fit our equations. And perhaps that's what keeps this story alive, the refusal of the universe to be fully known. As long as something remains unexplained, it keeps calling us back to wonder. It whispers to the part of us that still wants to believe there is something more than what we see, that the sky above us might still hold secrets older than we are. As night falls and the stars rise, One can imagine that somewhere up there, just beyond the visible, a dark shape still drifts silently, not watching, not judging, just waiting. Perhaps it's a remnant, perhaps a mirror, perhaps a question we have yet to learn how to ask. In the next part of our journey, we'll go deeper into the evidence and anomalies, the radar data, the intercepted signals, and the strange mathematical patterns that suggest the Black Night may not just be myth after all. But for now, let the thought linger softly in your mind that above this quiet, sleeping world, something ancient might still be circling, unseen but not forgotten. The deeper one looks into the Black Night mystery, the more it begins to feel like a puzzle assembled from fragments scattered across time, some technological, some mythic, and others simply misunderstood. The question that drives every investigator is the same. If the Black Night is real, what evidence do we actually have? The story begins, as so many do, with echoes, faint radio signals that seemed to come from nowhere. In the late 1920s, Norwegian engineer Jørgen Hals detected a strange phenomenon while experimenting with radio transmissions. He would send a signal, and then, seconds later, it would return, not as an echo from the Earth's surface, but from somewhere far beyond. These long delay echoes, or LDEs, were unlike anything scientists had seen. They weren't consistent with normal atmospheric reflections, and they didn't match known satellite orbits. At first, Hals thought it was equipment malfunction, but then others began to observe the same thing. British, Dutch, and American radio operators all reported similar patterns, echoes returning after several seconds, as if bouncing off an invisible mirror in space. Decades later, believers would point to these LDEs as early evidence of the Black Night satellite, claiming it was responding to humanity's first radio transmissions, testing, perhaps, whether the new species below was finally ready to be heard. Tesla himself, in 1899, had hinted at something similar. While testing his Colorado Springs transmitter, he spoke of receiving, repeating, intelligent signals that he was convinced came from another world. Mainstream science dismissed this at the time, suggesting interference or electrical resonance. But Tesla insisted that the signals carried structure, that they were intentional. In hindsight, some have connected Tesla's claim to the same mysterious echoes Hals heard 30 years later. If true, it would mean that whatever the Black Night is, it may have been responding to us long before we knew it was there. By the 1950s, radio astronomy had advanced dramatically, and the search for artificial signals from space became more serious. Researchers at the U.S. Air Force's Lincoln Laboratory began recording unexplained radar reflections appearing at irregular intervals, reflections that didn't match any known satellite trajectory. One of these was detected at an altitude and inclination that no Earth-launched object could achieve at the time. Even more strangely, some of the reflections repeated in a pattern that seemed to suggest orbit, as if a large, dark body was circling the planet in a stable path. Yet it wasn't visible on optical telescopes, and no known mission accounted for it. NASA's own early logs from Project Spacetrack mentioned several unidentified orbital objects, a bureaucratic phrase that quietly captured the attention of those who already believed. One of those entries, archived in 1960, matched the same period when newspapers first reported the mysterious dark satellite for investigators. This was the moment the myth crossed into history. There was now documented evidence, radar traces, orbital estimates, official mentions that an object was indeed there. Whether it was alien or not was beside the point. It existed, but as quickly as these traces appeared, they vanished. Files were classified, data disappeared, and public statements contradicted earlier records. It was as if the mystery itself had been scrubbed clean, leaving behind only rumors. Then came the ham radio decoding incident, one of the most curious subplots in the Black Knight story. In the 1970s, Scottish researcher Duncan Lunan reanalyzed some of the early long-delay echoes. When he plotted the timing of the echoes, he claimed to find a pattern that mapped out the constellation boats. Centered on the star Epsilon Boötis, roughly 200 light-years from Earth, Lunan suggested, cautiously, that this could be a message, one possibly left by an automated probe placed in Earth's orbit thousands of years ago. The message, he claimed, identified the probe's origin and purpose: to observe a young civilization and report back to its creators. Though his findings were later criticized and partially retracted, the story took on a life of its own. It became one of the most famous claims associated with the Black Knight satellite, that it wasn't just an object, but a messenger. Even now, when astronomers map orbital debris and active satellites, there are oddities that resist easy categorization. Small, non-reflective objects in polar orbits, detections that appear for a few cycles and then vanish. The Black Knight, if it exists, hides not by invisibility, but by blending perfectly into the chaos of our own technology, a shadow among our own creations. For the more skeptical, every piece of evidence can be explained away. The long delay echoes, atmospheric phenomena, the radar reflections, calibration errors, the NASA photographs, space debris. And yet, what fascinates even the most rational mind is the consistency of the myth. Across a century of observation, the pattern persists: a silent object, circling where no satellite should be, always just beyond full understanding, in quiet moments. One might wonder, what if that's the intention? What if the Black Knight is not meant to be discovered, but merely noticed, a test, perhaps, to see who among us keeps looking up? If we imagine such a device, its logic feels almost poetic. It does not interfere. It does not broadcast. It does not invade. It simply orbits, patient and indifferent, waiting for us to reach the level where we might finally interpret its silence as something more than absence, like a teacher who never speaks until the student is ready to listen. This thought echoes an idea shared by many early thinkers, from Carl Jung to Arthur C. Clarke, that perhaps the universe itself teaches through mystery. What we call coincidence might be a kind of invitation. What we call anomaly might be a gentle nudge toward awareness. So whether the Black Knight is alien technology or simply an enduring reflection of human imagination, it continues to serve a purpose. It pulls us out of complacency. It whispers that there are still unknowns orbiting our world, still gaps in our understanding that neither science nor superstition has closed. And maybe that's what matters most. The object's reality might be less important than the reaction it inspires, that instinct to wonder, to explore, to listen for the faintest echo from the sky. Because when the night is still, and the wind quiet, and you tune a radio to static, There's a feeling, faint, electric, that somewhere in that white noise, something ancient might still be listening back by the late 20th century. The mystery of the Black Night had almost faded into the background of UFO folklore until the cameras of modern technology brought it back into view. It happened quietly, as most legends do. In 1998, during NASA's STS-88 space shuttle mission, astronauts aboard Endeavour were working to assemble the first modules of the International Space Station. The mission was routine, carefully timed, and heavily documented. But among the thousands of photographs taken during that operation, a handful of images would ignite a storm of curiosity that still burns today. One image in particular stood out, a strange, angular, black object floating against the blue curve of Earth. It wasn't symmetrical like the satellite parts or the space tools astronauts used. It didn't resemble a panel, an antenna, or a piece of debris. It looked sculpted when the photo first surfaced. NASA's official explanation was quick. It was likely a thermal blanket accidentally released during a spacewalk, a harmless, lightweight piece of fabric that had drifted away and caught the sunlight. But for those who had followed the whispers of the Black Knight legend for decades, the resemblance was uncanny. The object in the photo looked nothing like a crumpled sheet. Its form appeared sharp and deliberate, with dark surfaces that caught the light unevenly. To believers, it looked manufactured, alien, even. The name resurfaced almost immediately, the Black Knight satellite. Within days, forums and early internet message boards filled with theories. Some pointed out that the object appeared to maintain a consistent orientation across multiple frames, suggesting controlled movement rather than drifting. Others claimed to have enhanced the image and found geometric symmetry in its structure. NASA continued to insist that the object was simply space debris, and that once it completed another orbit, it likely burned up in the atmosphere. But the photographs remained online, too striking, too mysterious to ignore. What fascinated people most was not just what the object looked like, but how perfectly it aligned with older accounts, radar, anomalies, echoes, and the myth of something ancient circling Earth. It felt as though the past had suddenly materialized in high resolution for those watching closely. This was not coincidence. They saw it as proof. The long-hidden satellite had finally been photographed, and perhaps NASA had accidentally revealed it. The story spread rapidly, far beyond UFO circles. Mainstream outlets covered it briefly, usually with a skeptical tone. Yet the images themselves told a story that logic couldn't easily undo. Even those who dismissed alien explanations couldn't deny how strangely elegant the object appeared. Dark, complex, almost deliberate in design. Soon, digital sleuths began connecting dots across decades. They revisited the 1960 radar incidents, the 1920s radio echoes, and even Tesla's mysterious transmissions, tracing a continuous thread through time. The photos from 1998 were, to them, the final link, visual confirmation of what had been sensed for nearly a century. The legend deepened further when enthusiasts discovered that NASA had quietly renamed or relocated several of the image files. Though this was standard archival practice, it fueled suspicion. Why, they asked, did the clearest photographs seem to vanish first? Why were higher resolution originals difficult to access? From these questions, a darker narrative emerged. Perhaps the Black Night wasn't just being ignored, it was being hidden. Conspiracy channels began producing early video essays, slow pans across the photographs, accompanied by eerie music and captions claiming, "NASA knows the truth." Each new upload reached thousands of viewers, and with each view, the mystery grew larger. The myth had evolved. What began as a scattered puzzle of radio echoes and rumors was now fully reborn in the digital age, a story that belonged to everyone with an internet connection. And maybe that's what made it powerful. For the first time in history, ordinary people could access space imagery directly from NASA's servers, analyze it, debate it, and share their findings instantly. The investigation was no longer limited to experts or insiders. It was in the hands of the public, a form of cosmic democracy. It's easy to see why the 1998 photos struck such a deep chord. The object itself, floating in silent orbit, reflected both our fear and fascination with the unknown. It represented everything modern civilization wanted to believe about the cosmos, that we are not alone, that mysteries still linger in the cold vacuum above, that discovery is not over, and in that sense, the Black Night served not as a threat, but as a mirror. The more we looked at it, the more we saw ourselves, our longing for contact, our obsession with meaning, our hunger for proof. NASA's explanations, however rational, could not erase that image from collective memory. The idea that something ancient might be orbiting our planet, unseen and unacknowledged, was too captivating to let go. Even years later, when clearer images and reanalyses confirmed that the object was indeed space debris, possibly part of a lost satellite thermal blanket, the legend refused to die. In online forums, people would post side-by-side comparisons, arguing that the debris explanation didn't match the object's shape or movement. Skeptics called it pattern recognition, our minds seeing meaning where none existed. But believers countered that dismissing everything unexplained as coincidence was just another form of blindness. Somewhere between those two views, the mystery continues to live, not as a provable fact, but as an idea that refuses to fade. If the Black Night truly is a lost alien artifact, it hides masterfully, revealing itself only through glimpses, reflections, and half-remembered signals. But if it isn't, then perhaps its real significance lies in how it awakens curiosity, reminding us that even in an age of satellites and instant data, the universe still holds its secrets. As one observer once wrote, "The stars may not speak, but the silence between them tells stories." And so, the image of that dark shape drifting over Earth remains a modern myth suspended between pixels and faith. In a way, the Black Night is both alien and human. It is our creation, shaped by our need to wonder. Each photograph, each radar blip, each faint echo across time, all of it builds a mosaic, not just of mystery, but of our endless desire to understand. And perhaps that is why it never fully disappears. Because it isn't only an object in orbit, it's a story in motion, one that continues to circle us quietly, waiting for the next time we look up. The years that followed the 1998 incident were filled with quiet debates. Scientists on one side, believers on the other, and in between, a growing number of curious minds who simply weren't sure. The Black Night had become more than a mystery. It was a conversation, unfolding across continents, whispered through late-night radio, shows and online forums that glowed softly in the darkness of computer screens. NASA's official line remained steady. The object was space debris, nothing more. In interviews, astronauts who had been aboard the Endeavour mission described how a thermal blanket had slipped from their grasp during a spacewalk and drifted away, reflecting the sun in odd patterns. The explanation made sense, rational, simple, mechanical, but somehow it didn't satisfy. Because if this had been a blanket, why did it seem to rotate so precisely? Why did it appear to maintain its orientation as if balanced, suspended by an invisible hand? And why did its contours look so deliberate? When scientists reanalyzed the photographs, they found that perspective played a trick on the human eye. The shape of the object changed slightly in each frame, consistent with the motion of a tumbling object. To the camera, however, it seemed fixed, a perfect illusion created by light and movement. Still, the more they explained, the less people wanted to believe. Because there was something poetic, even comforting, in imagining that this dark watcher in orbit might be more than just trash. From our own adventures, a small group of amateur astronomers began tracking what they believed could be the Black Knight's orbit. Using radio telescopes and long-range photography, they scanned the skies during predicted passes, hoping for a flicker, a signal, anything unusual. Most of the time, they found nothing but the soft hum of cosmic background noise. But occasionally, they picked up faint transmissions, bursts of radio static that didn't seem to match known satellites. Skeptics dismissed these as interference, reflections from Earth's surface, or signal bleed from crowded radio bands. Yet those who listened closely swore they could detect patterns, subtle shifts in frequency that hinted at structure, intention, even communication. It's in this gap between what science explains and what wonder refuses to release that the Black Knight continues to live. Perhaps that's what makes the legend so enduring. Not the evidence itself, but the feeling that evidence evokes, the sensation that something vast and ancient might still be moving just beyond our reach. There's a quiet tension in how we approach mysteries like this. On one side stands the cold precision of data, numbers, trajectories, probabilities. On the other stands the deep instinct of the human spirit, the whisper that says not everything can be measured. Between them lies a delicate balance, like the pull between Earth and the object that circles it. Some researchers have noted how the Black Knight myth seems to evolve in sync with our own technology. When we invented radio, the story began with strange echoes. When we built satellites, it transformed into something orbiting us. And when digital cameras captured the heavens, it appeared as a photograph. It's as if the legend grows with us, adapting to each new way we reach for the stars. And maybe that's the real point, not whether the object exists, but what it represents. Each generation finds its reflection in the unknown. In the early 1900s, Tesla saw potential in the stars. In the 1950s, Cold War nations projected their fears into orbit. And in the Internet age, the Black Knight became a shared myth, a global dream of contact. It's no longer just about an object in space. It's about us, the watchers below. We build our stories as carefully as we build our satellites, sending them out into the dark, hoping they'll find something waiting. If the Black Knight were real, truly ancient, truly intelligent, what would it think of us now? Would it see a species still fumbling through infancy, peering upward with fragile instruments and fragile hearts? Or would it see potential, a spark of curiosity worth protecting? In the absence of proof, imagination fills the void. Writers, artists, and filmmakers began weaving the Black Night into their work. It became a symbol, sometimes ominous, sometimes divine, a silent observer, a celestial sentinel, a warning, a gift. And yet, even the skeptics who rolled their eyes at conspiracy theories couldn't fully dismiss the pull of the story. Because deep down, everyone carries that same yearning, the wish that something greater is out there, watching not with malice, but with recognition. It's a longing that has followed humanity since the first nights of firelight, a desire to not be alone beneath the infinite. So perhaps the Black Night isn't a satellite at all, but a mirror held up to the sky, reflecting back our eternal question: who else is out there? For now, the object remains, whether real or imagined, an echo looping endlessly through our culture. Some say it's a fable born from static and shadows. Others whisper that it's still up there, hidden behind the cold geometry of orbit, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. But one thing is certain: myths like the Black Night endure not because they are proven, but because they make us look deeper at the sky, at history, and at ourselves. The next part of this journey will lead us further into that human side, to the voices who claim they've seen or heard what others deny, astronauts, technicians, and witnesses whose words, once dismissed, now linger like signals carried on the wind. Their stories form the next layer of this mystery, the part where silence begins to speak. There's a saying among astronomers: space remembers everything. Every orbit, every echo, every forgotten transmission leaves a trace, faint but never gone. And somewhere within those faint traces lies the puzzle of the Black Night. When scientists first began mapping artificial satellites, they noticed something unusual. Certain radar returns didn't match any known object. These blips appeared in orbits that shouldn't have existed, neither belonging to American nor Soviet programs. Some passed overhead at strange intervals. Others moved in ways that suggested they were decades older than any satellite we'd launched. The first reports came in the early 1960s, during the height of the space race. Ground stations in both the US and Europe logged unexplained echoes, signals that seemed to bounce from something invisible above. At first, technicians assumed they were reflections from the moon or ionospheric distortion. But as the data came in, the pattern didn't fit. The echoes were too precise, returning after seconds instead of milliseconds. These became known as long-delayed echoes, or LDEs. Some thought they might be secret military satellites. Others whispered of something else, an ancient object that had been orbiting Earth long before Sputnik ever left the ground. The idea gained traction because the echoes weren't random. Some radio operators claimed they followed sequences, pulses that seemed to repeat or vary intentionally. Amateur researchers plotted them as graphs, searching for meaning. A few even believed the patterns corresponded to star maps, constellations from thousands of years ago, as if the sender wanted to show us where they came from. No proof was ever found, but the allure of coded intelligence lingered. If there was something ancient out there, silently circling Earth. Could it have been trying to make contact? As technology advanced, the mystery deepened. Tracking networks grew more sophisticated, but anomalies continued to appear, unexplained readings that didn't match the catalog of human-made satellites. Every so often, a radar sweep would catch a faint signal in polar orbit, moving too slowly for debris, yet too predictably for a rock. Polar orbit itself was strange. It was the same type of path used by reconnaissance satellites, allowing full coverage of the planet as it rotates beneath. If the Black Knight truly occupied such an orbit, that would mean it could observe every inch of Earth, silently, methodically, endlessly. It was as if the planet had been under quiet surveillance for centuries. Mainstream science offered explanations: debris, natural rock, old fragments of missions gone by. The space above us is not empty. It's littered with reminders of our curiosity. But still, certain anomalies refused to fade. One of the most famous came from a small team of radar operators at Grumman Aircraft in 1960. They detected an unidentified object moving in polar orbit, dark and unlisted. The U.S. government quickly classified the incident, later announcing it was a piece of an American satellite that had gone astray. But no one ever confirmed which satellite it had been. The story spread through newspapers, igniting the imagination of millions. Some articles even claimed the Pentagon believed the object had been up there for over 13,000 years. The number was never verified, but it stuck, minus 13,000 years. Like a whisper of something impossibly old watching us from the dark. Skeptics dismissed it as myth-making, born from Cold War paranoia and poor data. But even the skeptics admitted the timing was odd. How could multiple independent radar systems across continents all pick up the same unknown signal days apart? It's possible, of course, that human error or atmospheric interference caused it. Yet the Black Knight's legend thrives in those small spaces between possible and unexplained. Some analysts have since speculated that what we saw might have been a relic, not alien, but human, a forgotten experiment launched secretly during early military tests. During the late 1950s, both superpowers were experimenting with reflective balloons and radar calibration targets. Some of those objects could easily have gone astray, their origins lost to classified archives. But believers counter with a different argument. If this object were man-made, why did no one ever claim it? Why hide something so remarkable for decades? They point to the silence, not the noise, as evidence. The way governments avoided the topic entirely, the way early records vanished or were redacted. Silence, they say, can sometimes speak louder than denial. In 1973, Scottish researcher Duncan Lunan revisited the original long-delayed echoes and attempted to decode them. By mapping the delays as coordinates, he claimed they pointed to the star Epsilon Boötis, as it would have appeared 13,000 years ago. His interpretation was bold. The Black Knight, he said, was a probe left by an ancient civilization to monitor Earth, sending out signals to anyone advanced enough to notice. The scientific community rejected his conclusion as speculative, but the story spread quickly. Radio shows, magazines, and even classrooms began to mention the idea in passing, not as proof, but as possibility. And perhaps that's all it ever needed to be, a possibility. Because when you strip away the noise, the data, the skepticism, what remains is a feeling, that quiet hum of wonder that comes from looking at the sky and realizing how much we still don't know. The black night might be a satellite. It might be debris. It might even be a reflection of ourselves, our need to turn the unknown into a story that feels alive. But then again, what if it's not? What if it's truly something ancient, waiting patiently, orbiting in silence, until the moment we are ready to understand? As our instruments improve and our reach extends beyond Earth's shadow, we continue to search, not just for life, but for meaning in the signals that surround us. And in that search, every anomaly, every flicker of static, becomes a potential message. Somewhere above, among the quiet stars and forgotten paths of orbit, something may still be listening. And in the next section, we'll drift closer to those voices, to the accounts of those who say they've seen the black night with their own eyes, and heard what they were told not to repeat, because sometimes the evidence isn't written in numbers or radar readings. Sometimes it's whispered in human memory. If the first half of the Black Knight story is written in signals and static, the second half is written in silence, in the gaps between official explanations and the things we were told not to ask about. In the decades following those strange radar detections, the world moved forward. Men walked on the moon, probes traveled beyond Mars, satellites became as common as stars in the sky. And yet, every few years, someone, an astronaut, a radio operator, a defense contractor, would bring up that same shape in orbit. In 1998, during the STS-88 mission, the Space Shuttle Endeavour was making its first flight to the International Space Station. Among the hundreds of photos taken that week, one image began to circulate online, a dark, angular object floating against the curve of the Earth. It didn't look like debris. It looked sculpted, deliberate, almost like a winged craft. NASA later stated it was just a piece of thermal blanket that had drifted away during an EVA, a lost fragment of insulation. Nothing more. The official explanation was simple, but for many, the image was anything but. The object seemed to hover like a sentinel, silent and watching. For believers, this was it. Photographic proof of the Black Knight, finally caught by human eyes. The photo became legend overnight. UFO forums, documentaries, and news outlets across the world discussed it, dissected it, debated it. And with every retelling, the mystery grew. Skeptics pushed back hard. They pointed out that the object appeared in multiple angles only during a brief window, and then vanished once the insulation fragment burned up in the atmosphere. To them, it was a perfect example of human imagination bending random images into myth. But others noticed something else, that NASA never denied the resemblance, only redefined it. Thermal blanket became a synonym for mystery, a phrase whispered whenever something unusual was spotted during a mission. Astronauts, too, sometimes added fuel to the fire. During later missions, a few hinted at objects they couldn't identify. Most of them chalked it up to debris, reflections, or tricks of light. But not all were so sure. One Apollo astronaut once remarked, off record, "Sometimes we'd see things we couldn't explain, and we'd just stop talking about them." That quiet refusal became part of the myth. The Black Knight wasn't just an object anymore. It was a symbol of the things humanity saw but wasn't ready to confront. Meanwhile, Outside official circles, researchers began to weave the old data into something much larger. They connected Duncan Lunan's decoded star maps with ancient myths about sky watchers and celestial messengers. They noticed that the supposed 13,000-year orbit lined up roughly with the end of the last ice age, the dawn of human civilization. Was it coincidence or design? The theory evolved. The Black Knight, they said, could be a sentinel probe left by an ancient extraterrestrial race to monitor emerging civilizations. A watcher in the dark, observing us since the beginning of recorded history. That idea struck a deep chord, not just among UFO believers, but among ordinary dreamers, people who looked up and felt, somehow, that humanity was not alone in its journey, because deep down, there's comfort in the thought that someone has been watching over us, not as conquerors or gods, but as quiet witnesses to our progress. It reframes loneliness into connection. It makes the cold infinity of space feel almost inhabited, of course. Science does not build itself on comfort. The skeptics argue that every story told about the Black Knight can be traced back to ordinary origins, to balloon debris, signal reflection, or photographic illusion. And in truth, they may be right, but stories don't survive 70 years because of proof. They survive because of resonance. Because even the smallest mystery in the vastness of space can feel enormous when we don't fully understand it. The Black Knight's legend endures precisely because it lives in the middle ground between what is measurable and what is meaningful, between data and desire. When you close your eyes and imagine that dark object circling above, slow, steady, eternal, you realize how little we've truly explored our own cosmic backyard. There are thousands of pieces of space debris, defunct satellites, fragments of missions long forgotten, all drifting silently in orbit. And yet, among them, one, just one, could be something more. That possibility is enough. And so the myth of the Black Knight continues to orbit our imagination, just as the object itself is said to orbit the Earth. Both move silently through the dark, untouched by time, unclaimed by truth. New images have surfaced. Some show similar dark forms against the light of dawn. Others show nothing at all. NASA continues to catalog every piece of debris that can be tracked, and none of them, officially, match the description of the Black Knight. But every once in a while, amateur astronomers report flashes, short-lived reflections, moving at strange angles, too slow to be meteors, too precise to be random. Perhaps it's nothing. Perhaps it's everything. Maybe the Black Knight has been up there since before we were ready to see it. A reminder that discovery begins not with answers, but with questions. And so, as night falls again on our quiet planet, and the sky fills with the hum of satellites and dreams, one question lingers like a faint echo across time. If something is watching us, what does it see? In the next section, we'll drift further into the origins of this legend, tracing how ancient myths, Tesla's experiments, and mysterious signals all converged into one of the most enduring mysteries of our space age, because sometimes the oldest stories begin with a single spark or a single transmission from the stars. Before satellites became a part of daily life, before radar screens mapped the invisible skies, one man was already listening in 1899, deep in the mountains of Colorado, Nikola Tesla sat in his laboratory, surrounded by coils and wires that glowed softly with electric life. The night outside was still. The stars above shimmered like 1,000 distant instruments, and Tesla believed the universe itself might be playing a kind of music, a cosmic symphony waiting to be heard. As he tuned his experimental radio receiver, he began to pick up signals, not random static, but rhythmic, deliberate pulses, repeating in patterns that felt too structured to be natural. He called them electrical actions, which appear to be intelligent. Tesla believed he was intercepting messages, not from another country, but from another world. His contemporaries dismissed it as interference. Yet, looking back now, it's hard not to hear the echo of the Black Knight's story in Tesla's words, a mysterious transmission drifting from the dark. Long before humanity ever launched a single satellite, some historians later suggested Tesla was detecting pulsars, dense, rotating stars that emit regular bursts of radio energy. But pulsars weren't discovered until 1967, nearly 70 years after Tesla's strange night in the mountains. Others speculated that perhaps he was hearing something closer, something orbiting between the Earth and the stars. And so, the seed of the Black Knight legend was planted, not as an object, but as a voice, a whisper across space. Decades later, in the early 1920s, radio operators in Norway and the Netherlands reported similar phenomena, what they called long-delayed echoes. They would send a signal and hear it return seconds later, as if something invisible was bouncing it back from above the Earth. The delay was too long for atmospheric reflection and too short to come from the moon. The source was nowhere and everywhere at once. Scientists debated it for years. Some said it was a quirk of ionospheric layers. Others said it was a transmission reflected from an unknown satellite. At the time, no satellites existed. Humanity hadn't yet learned to place its machines in orbit. And yet, there it was, a mysterious mirror in the sky, repeating our own words back to us like a cosmic echo. By the mid-20th century, these stories began to merge: Tesla's signals, the long-delayed echoes, and the unidentified radar contacts of the 1950s, like fragments of a puzzle scattered across time. They seemed to form the outline of something larger, something watching. The first official satellites, Sputnik, Explorer, Vanguard, entered orbit, and humans finally had eyes in the heavens. But even then, strange detections continued. Radar technicians sometimes tracked objects that moved differently, slower, or at unusual inclinations. They didn't fit the expected patterns. Some vanished mid-scan, as if blinking out of existence. The media of the 1950s loved stories like that. The Cold War was in full swing, and space had become the new frontier for both fear and fascination. When reporters heard that an unknown satellite was circling the Earth, some suggested it was Soviet. Others whispered it wasn't human at all. Magazines printed speculative sketches, dark, bat-like silhouettes gliding above the planet, ancient and alien. Some even claimed the object transmitted coded messages to ground stations. The legend of the Black Knight was reborn, now cloaked in modern language, but carrying the same mythic heartbeat that had pulsed through Tesla's lab half a century earlier. In the decades that followed, researchers tried to trace the legend back to a single source, but the trail always divided and dissolved. Each thread seemed to lead to another time, another witness, another mystery. It was as if the story itself refused to be captured, orbiting perpetually just beyond reach. Still, the symbolism remained powerful. Humanity, barely able to leave its own atmosphere, was already haunted by the idea that something else had been here first, waiting, watching, circling. To some, it was unnerving. To others, profoundly comforting, because if the Black Night existed, it meant the universe wasn't indifferent. It meant that long before we looked outward, someone or something had looked inward, toward us. Even now, scientists occasionally revisit the Tesla mystery, not for proof of aliens, but because of what it represents: the dawn of listening, the moment when human beings first realized that space could speak. And maybe that's what the Black Night truly is, not a machine of metal and shadow, but an idea, a metaphor for curiosity itself, for the hunger that drives us to send signals into the dark and hope something listens back. When Tesla heard those strange pulses, he wasn't just eavesdropping on the cosmos. He was opening a conversation, and that conversation continues across time and technology, from primitive coils and antennas to the silent hum of modern satellites drifting high above our heads. The story of the Black Night reminds us that the line between science and myth isn't a wall, it's a mirror. One reflects the other. Our myths become maps, guiding us toward discoveries we don't yet understand. Perhaps one day we'll know exactly what Tesla heard. Perhaps we'll even find the source of those early echoes. But until then, the mystery remains alive, orbiting our imaginations just as surely as the Black Night is said to orbit our planet. And as night settles again, it's hard not to wonder, maybe the first true contact wasn't a sighting, but a sound, faint, repeating, ancient. The universe whispering back to the first human who dared to listen. In the next part, we'll move beyond the data into the realm of those who claimed to have seen or felt the presence of the Black Night firsthand. Astronauts, military operators, and ordinary skywatchers whose experiences suggest that sometimes the boundary between truth and myth may be thinner than we think. By the time the 1960s arrived, the Cold War had turned the sky into a stage. Every radar ping, every mysterious reflection, every orbiting dot of light was a potential threat or a potential discovery. The space race was young, but paranoia was ancient. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had their eyes fixed upward, and both began noticing things that shouldn't have been there. One night in 1960, the U.S. Navy's radar picked up an object circling the Earth in polar orbit. It was large, dark, and moving against the direction of Earth's rotation. That orbit alone was strange. No known satellite at the time could maintain such a trajectory. The first reports were quietly logged, then passed through classified channels. The media, however, caught a whisper of it. Newspapers began to buzz. "Mystery satellite circles the Earth," one headline read. Some speculated it was a Soviet spycraft. Others suggested it was something even older, something not built by human hands. Official sources tried to calm the storm, claiming it was likely space debris or a misidentified object. Yet, even within military and scientific circles, whispers persisted that the readings were too consistent, too stable, to be a random fragment. Whatever it was It was flying perfectly, silently, along an orbit that predated our ability to achieve it. Among those intrigued by the event was a Scottish researcher named Duncan Lunan in the 1970s. Lunan began re-examining those strange, long-delayed echoes reported decades earlier. He took the delay patterns and, instead of dismissing them as random noise, he plotted them as coordinates, and to his surprise, they formed a recognizable constellation, Epsilon. Butis Lunan proposed an astonishing idea that the echoes were not accidental at all, but a deliberate message sent from a satellite placed in orbit around Earth thousands of years ago. According to his analysis, the message read like a greeting, a signal from an ancient probe warning that its creators once lived near Epsilon Butis and had sent it here to watch over us. The theory caused a sensation. Some hailed Lunan as a visionary, while others dismissed the whole thing as numerology and coincidence. Lunan himself later distanced from parts of his conclusion, but the idea refused to die. The thought that a silent guardian might be circling our world, ancient, patient, and intelligent, had already taken root in the collective imagination. As technology advanced, so did the sightings. During the 1980s and 1990s, astronauts aboard the space shuttle reported unusual shapes and movements outside their crafts, dark objects gliding slowly past, seeming to follow, then vanish into the black dot. In 1998, during the STS-88 mission, NASA released photographs that reignited the legend entirely. One of those images showed a strange, angular object floating in orbit, black, metallic, and irregularly shaped, like a shard of alien architecture. The photos went viral in the early days of the Internet. Forums and conspiracy sites exploded with discussion. Many claimed it was the clearest evidence yet of the Black Night. NASA offered a simple explanation. The object, they said, was a piece of thermal blanket that had come loose during the mission debris. Nothing more. But the image itself told a different story to those who believed. It didn't look like cloth. It looked like machinery. The photograph, with its haunting geometry and shadows, became the modern face of the Black Knight legend, the closest thing to a portrait of the unknown. Even skeptics admitted there was something uncanny about it. What made the image so compelling wasn't just the shape, but the feeling it evoked, that sense of scale and stillness, the lonely grandeur of a single object drifting above the world. Whether it was a scrap of insulation or a relic of alien design, it reminded humanity how small and fragile our creations are compared to the vast quiet of space. Over the years, astronauts have been asked about the Black Knight in interviews. Most smile politely, dismissing it as myth. But occasionally, their eyes flicker with that unmistakable look. The look of someone who's seen things that can't be easily categorized. One veteran pilot once said, "Out there, you learn quickly that not everything has an answer. You just do your job, and you keep your eyes forward." Another, when pressed about unidentified objects, replied quietly, "Sometimes the silence is the most interesting part of the mission." Maybe they were speaking about debris, maybe not. The Black Knight's power lies not in proof, but in suggestion. It represents the haunting possibility that we are being watched, not by hostile invaders, but by witnesses, observers, beings who measure time in millennia and curiosity in silence. As the years passed, more evidence surfaced: radar readings, orbital anomalies. Recordings of repeating signals that some claimed matched Lunan's epsilon Buddhist pattern. None could be confirmed beyond doubt, yet each added another brushstroke to the same dark canvas. Even now, amateur astronomers sometimes report tracking unidentified objects in high orbit, moving slower than satellites, faster than space junk, steady, precise, almost deliberate. They post images online, and while experts often debunk them as shadows or mystifications, the mystery endures. Because the truth is this: we want to believe, not in monsters or conspiracies, but in meaning. The idea that something beyond us could be curious enough to watch, gentle enough to wait, and advanced enough to remain unseen. And perhaps, somewhere high above, that dark shape still glides, silent, ancient, orbiting with purpose known only to itself. In the next section, we'll explore how these stories of signals, sightings, and speculation merged into a single myth that refuses to fade. We'll look at how the Black Night became more than a mystery. It became a mirror for our own search for connection in the infinite night. Once whispered in laboratories and military offices, the tale of the Black Night escaped gravity and entered the realm of collective myth. It drifted from research papers to news headlines, from radio shows to the early corners of the internet, gathering shape and shadow as it went. Like the object itself, it seemed to orbit human imagination, never quite landing, never entirely vanishing. The 1998 NASA photographs became the spark for a cultural wildfire. Online forums filled with pixel-by-pixel analyses of the strange black form, each new angle offering another theory. Some insisted it was clearly technological, its edges too sharp, its surfaces too deliberate. Others saw faces, symbols, even inscriptions hidden in the light and shadow. Debunkers countered with diagrams, pointing out that the shape matched a piece of discarded thermal insulation. But in the quiet corners of the web, a different kind of discussion bloomed. If this wasn't the Black Night, then where was the real one? The legend began merging with older space mysteries. People connected it to Nikola Tesla's early experiments in wireless energy and his claim of receiving signals not of this earth. They linked it to the mysterious, long-delayed echoes heard by radio operators in the 1920s. Strand wove into a single story, one of an ancient satellite orbiting patiently, sending coded messages to anyone who could hear. Artists, writers, and filmmakers began to notice. The Black Night became a muse. It appeared in paintings, science fiction novels, and short films as a symbol of the unknown watcher, an idea rather than an object. Musicians referenced it in lyrics, using it as a metaphor for distant love, forgotten civilizations, or the loneliness of space. The more people learned about it, the less they agreed on what it was, but the more they felt it meant something. That's how myths survive, not through evidence, but through resonance. Even mainstream documentaries began to touch on it, carefully balancing skepticism with wonder. Astronomers would smile and say, "There's nothing up there we haven't catalogued." Yet the footage they showed, empty night skies filled with drifting light, only deepened the feeling that something might still be hiding between the stars. In truth, what made the Black Night compelling wasn't the photographs or the radar readings. It was the way the story reflected our own desires. Humans have always looked upward, searching for signs of design, of purpose. We've seen gods in constellations, omens in comets, and meaning in the orbits of distant worlds. The Black Night was simply the modern version of an ancient impulse to believe that we are not alone, and that whoever might be out there, they're paying attention. For many believers, the satellite became more than a relic of alien technology, became a symbol of continuity. If a civilization long before us had placed a watcher in orbit, it meant intelligence could outlast extinction. It meant consciousness could survive the rise and fall of worlds. That idea comforted some, unsettled others. But to everyone it whispered the same thought. We are part of something vast and ongoing. In interviews, people who had spent their lives studying anomalies in orbital data often spoke softly about it. They weren't zealots or thrill seekers, just curious minds who couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. There's an elegance to its supposed orbit, one researcher said. Too stable to be junk, too quiet to be ours. When asked what he thought it might be, he smiled and said, "Maybe it's waiting for us to notice it properly." There's something deeply human about that phrase, waiting for us to notice. It suggests that the mystery isn't out there, but here. That discovery begins not with telescopes, but with attention. Perhaps that's why the Black Night has endured for so long. It doesn't demand belief, only curiosity in quiet nights. People still point their cameras toward the heavens, capturing faint, unexplained movements. Amateur astronomers trade data, trying to match what they see with existing satellite catalogs. Sometimes an object appears where none should be. They share coordinates, track it for a few orbits, and then it fades. Maybe it's a trick of light, a fragment tumbling through shadow. Or maybe it's the same silent observer, making another slow pass above our world. Legends thrive in uncertainty. The less we know, the more room there is for wonder. And in a universe this large, wonder is a survival instinct. It keeps us exploring, questioning, reaching outward. The Black Night, real or imagined, performs an essential function. It keeps us curious. In a way, the legend has achieved what no confirmed alien probe ever could. It united dreamers across the planet under a single mystery. People from different countries, speaking different languages, all looking up at the same patch of sky, whispering the same question. Not what is it, but who are we, if something so old and so patient has been watching us all along? Some believers think the answer will come soon. They talk about hidden data, recovered materials, secret missions that already made contact. Skeptics, of course, roll their eyes. Yet even skepticism feeds the legend, because every argument keeps the story alive. The Black Night doesn't need proof to exist. It only needs to be imagined, and once imagined, it can never fully fade. Perhaps, somewhere in orbit, a fragment of metal truly does drift, unseen and forgotten. Or perhaps the Black Night is not in the sky at all, but in our minds, a projection of our need to connect with something greater, something older, something enduring. In the next section, we'll follow that thread, the emotional side of the mystery, and explore how this ancient modern myth became a reflection of humanity's own longing for meaning in the cosmos. Sometimes, what draws us to a mystery has little to do with the facts themselves. It's not always about the shape of an object, or the trail of data, or the silence of the officials who refuse to comment. It's about what the mystery mirrors back to us, the part of ourselves that still feels small beneath the stars, and yet somehow connected to them. The Black Knight satellite, whether real or imagined, touches that ancient ache. It gives form to the feeling that something larger, wiser, and older than us might still be watching. Throughout history, humanity has looked upward to find meaning. The Egyptians built monuments aligned with the heavens. The Mayans mapped entire calendars based on the movements of celestial bodies. The Greeks named planets after gods. And in every age, there has been the question, who is out there? The Black Knight may just be the latest vessel for that question. The modern myth through which we continue the oldest conversation of all. In quiet homes and small apartments, people listen to late-night radio shows, read strange reports, and fall asleep with thoughts of satellites that aren't supposed to exist. They imagine it drifting silently above, tracing its orbit over dark oceans and glowing cities, passing unseen over deserts and frozen poles. It doesn't flash or call attention to itself. It simply moves, patient and constant, as though it has nowhere else to be. That image, something ancient, watching from the sky, speaks to the human soul more deeply than any photograph ever could. For dreamers, the Black Knight represents possibility. For skeptics, it represents the boundaries of reason. And for everyone in between, it represents the space between knowing and wondering. That space, where doubt and imagination overlap, is where humanity often does its best thinking. Because to wonder is to admit that the story isn't finished. Philosophers sometimes describe myths as mirrors for the mind. They reflect our hopes and fears back to us, reshaped into symbols we can hold. The Black Knight, then, is more than a rumor of alien technology. It's a mirror for our loneliness. We live on a small, bright world surrounded by vast silence. For all our technology and progress, we still haven't found anyone else. The idea of an ancient probe orbiting Earth is comforting in a strange way. It suggests that someone, somewhere, thought we were worth watching. The story also speaks to time, deep, unfathomable time. If the Black Knight truly predates humanity, then it connects us to an age long before history, when other eyes might have gazed upon the same stars. It turns the cold machinery of space into something almost spiritual, as if the universe itself keeps memory. Perhaps that's why so many are drawn to it. It feels like proof that existence has continuity, that life and intelligence are threads woven across cosmic ages, and yet, even if none of it is true, even if the object was nothing more than insulation tumbling through low Earth orbit, the myth remains powerful. Because myths don't need to be factual to be true. Their truth lies in what they awaken in us. The Black Knight whispers that curiosity is sacred, that silence is not emptiness, and that looking upward still matters. Late at night, when the world quiets and the hum of the day fades, some part of us still listens. We listen for signals, for patterns, for a sound that doesn't belong. The same impulse that led ancient astronomers to chart the stars now drives engineers and hobbyists to build radio receivers in their basements, searching for a voice from beyond. Maybe it's not the Black Knight they're listening for. Maybe it's a reflection of our own longing to be seen, to be known, to not be alone. Imagine for a moment the satellite, real or imagined, gliding above the sleeping earth. Below it, oceans shimmer in moonlight, clouds curl like whispers, and cities glow like constellations turned inward. It doesn't matter whether it's metal or myth. What matters is that it reminds us of our place in the cosmos, tiny but luminous. The Black Knight doesn't just orbit the Earth. It orbits our imagination. In every generation, a story like this returns. Sometimes it's about gods descending from the stars. Sometimes it's about messages hidden in radio waves. Sometimes it's about a black shape in the sky, too steady to be junk, too silent to be ours. Each retelling changes the details, but keeps the feeling, that strange blend of awe and recognition. It's as if, deep down, we already know that the universe is alive in ways we don't yet understand. There's beauty in the not knowing. The unknown isn't an enemy to fear, but a horizon to move toward. That's what the Black Knight invites us to remember, that exploration isn't just about maps and machines, but about the courage to keep asking questions. Maybe it's not an alien object at all. Maybe it's a reminder of what makes us human, the hunger for connection, the poetry of curiosity, the patience to keep looking up. And so, as this chapter of the story draws to a close, we drift with that thought. The Black Knight remains above us, or maybe within us, orbiting endlessly, carrying our wonder with it. Every night, when we tilt our heads toward the stars, we join that orbit for a moment, suspended between the known and the possible. The sky remains silent, but silence has never stopped us from listening. If the Black Knight truly exists, then it cannot simply be an accident of orbit or a forgotten fragment of technology. There must be a reason, a design behind its presence, a purpose that transcends our immediate understanding. Throughout human history, purpose has always been the thread that ties mystery to meaning. When faced with something vast and inexplicable, our first question is never just what is it, but why is it here? It's a quiet question that echoes across the centuries, whispered in monasteries, observatories, and radio towers. And tonight, as we drift together through this story, we can let that question unfold softly, like a signal traveling through deep space, fading, returning, reshaping itself with every echo. Some have suggested that the Black Knight is a sentinel, a kind of cosmic watchtower left by an ancient civilization. In this version of the story, the satellite was placed in orbit thousands of years ago, long before the first radio signal ever left Earth. Its purpose: to observe, to listen, to record. Perhaps it was designed to awaken once humanity reached a certain stage, once our technologies, our frequencies, our thoughts became bright enough to be noticed. There's something hauntingly poetic in that idea. The thought that somewhere, light years away, a civilization once decided to send a quiet observer to watch over us, to record the rise and fall of human history from above the clouds. Not to interfere, not to rule, but simply to witness, to be the silent archivist of our species, if such a being exists. It might see us not as we see ourselves, chaotic, divided, and fragile, but as a young intelligence, still learning to find harmony between creation and destruction. It might see our wars and our dreams as part of the same pattern, the necessary turbulence of growth. It might see beauty where we see struggle. Others imagine the Black Knight not as a watcher, but as a messenger, a vessel meant to bridge the distance between civilizations. A cosmic letter written in mathematics and magnetic fields, waiting for us to learn the language to read it. The idea of a message orbiting above our heads has stirred the hearts of many scientists and philosophers alike. If it carries a code, a signal, or a pattern of intent, then decoding it would not just be communication, it would be communion. But communication requires both sender and receiver to exist in time. If the Black Night has circled Earth for thousands of years, the beings who sent it, they could be dust drifting through another galaxy, long gone yet still speaking to us through their creation. Imagine that a final message from a civilization that no longer is, continuing to orbit a small blue world, keeping their memory alive through endless silence. There's another, a more unsettling idea, that the Black Night could be a mirror probe, that it's not watching us at all, but reflecting something back, perhaps to where it came from. Every signal, every radar pulse, every transmission we send might be echoed outward across unimaginable distances. If true, then Earth is not merely being observed. It's participating in a conversation it doesn't yet understand. For some, that thought is eerie. For others, it's sacred, because it means that no matter how alone we may feel, we are already in contact, not through words, but through presence, through the quiet acknowledgement that someone, somewhere, still cares to listen. Science, of course, seeks simpler answers. Many astronomers dismiss the notion entirely, attributing sightings to space debris, radar confusion, or photographic artifacts. But even among scientists, the allure of the mystery persists, because, in space exploration, truth often hides behind what we first call error. Many discoveries were once mistakes. Many impossible ideas eventually became accepted fact. The line between myth and discovery is often drawn in pencil, waiting to be redrawn. Philosophically, the question of purpose extends beyond the satellite itself. It touches on our own role in the cosmos. If we were to find proof that an ancient intelligence placed the Black Night here, it would change not only our science, but our sense of identity. Humanity would become a character in a larger cosmic story, not the first to look up at the stars, but the latest dot, in a way that realization might bring peace, because it would remind us that our struggles are not unique to us, that other civilizations may have faced their own chaos, their own moments of despair, and still chosen to reach outward, to create, to explore, to connect. The Black Night, then, would stand as a monument, not of fear, but of faith, faith in continuity, in the enduring will of consciousness to reach across the void. Even the most skeptical minds can find beauty in that, because whether it's alien technology or human misinterpretation, the Black Night story teaches us to stay curious, to keep searching for meaning even when answers remain distant. It invites us to slow down, breathe, and remember that the night sky is not empty. It's alive with history, with movement, with echoes of thought that may be far older than we are. And perhaps that is the real purpose. Not surveillance, not communication, but awakening, the gentle stirring of wonder. The Black Night calls us to look up again, to rediscover the childlike awe that modern life often buries. It asks us to feel small again, not as an insult, but as an invitation to humility and wonder. As you listen now, imagine that satellite, dark, silent, unblinking, moving steadily above the turning earth. Imagine it watching centuries roll beneath it like tides, empires rising and fading, generations born and gone. And through it all, the black night endures, unchanging. It reminds us that time is vast, but meaning is what we give it. Maybe that's the answer to its purpose. Maybe it exists so that we never forget to wonder. There's something almost sacred about the space between what we know and what we imagine. That quiet tension between science and belief has always defined humanity's greatest discoveries and its deepest mysteries. The Black Knight satellite lives precisely in that space, where logic and wonder meet. It is both a puzzle for engineers and a poem for dreamers. When scientists first turned their instruments toward the skies, they weren't just mapping stars, they were searching for meaning. To understand the heavens was to understand ourselves. And yet, as technology advanced, something strange happened. The stars became closer, more measurable, but somehow less magical. Data replaced myth, and in doing so, it left a silence behind. The Black Knight story reawakens that silence. It sits just beyond the edge of accepted truth, whispering to both skeptic and believer alike, look again, for the scientific mind. The satellite is a riddle of observation, a question of evidence, orbit, and classification. Does the object truly exist as something unknown? Could it be debris from early missions, a thermal blanket drifting in sunlight, or an uncharted relic from Cold War surveillance? These are reasonable questions, and science demands them. Skepticism is not the enemy of mystery, it's its companion. But the emotional weight of the story doesn't live in data. It lives in the quiet human response, that deep, instinctive feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's something greater watching from above. Science can measure radiation, track trajectories, and capture images. But it cannot measure the quiet shiver that runs down your spine when you imagine being seen by something ancient, intelligent, and still. And perhaps that's where the two perspectives begin to meet. Because, at their core, both science and spirituality seek the same thing: connection. Science connects us through understanding. Spirituality connects us through meaning. Together, they form a bridge across the unknown. The Black Knight becomes that bridge. To the rational mind, it's an unsolved phenomenon. To the soul, it's a reminder of the unseen. Its mystery refuses to belong entirely to either camp, existing instead in the twilight space between knowing and believing. Think of Nikola Tesla, one of the first humans to pick up signals he believed came from beyond Earth. He was a man of science, grounded in the mechanics of electricity and invention, yet also a dreamer who listened for voices in the static. He never dismissed the possibility of communication beyond our world. In a way, he embodied the duality that the Black Knight represents: analytical and mystical, measured and visionary. The more we look into the story, the more we realize how deeply it mirrors human nature itself. We are creatures of curiosity and faith, constantly weaving facts into meaning, and meaning into hope. When we face something that defies explanation, we don't stop asking questions, we start telling stories. That's not a flaw. That's our way of participating in the mystery. And maybe that's what the Black Knight invites us to do. Not to prove or disprove, but to participate, to engage with wonder without rushing to conclusion. to let both reason and reverence coexist in the same breath. There are scientists who look at the data and see nothing more than coincidence. There are believers who see the hand of ancient intelligence. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more beautiful. Maybe it's both. Maybe the coincidence itself is the message. A reminder that not all things fit neatly into human categories. When we observe the black night through a telescope, or even through imagination, we're not just looking outward, we're looking inward. What we choose to see says as much about us as it does about the object itself. Do we see a discarded relic or a deliberate creation? Do we see emptiness or evidence of design? Every answer reveals our relationship with mystery. The night sky, after all, has always reflected our inner world. To ancient civilizations, the stars were gods and guides. To modern astronomers, they are nuclear furnaces billions of miles away. But both views, in their own way, are true. The stars are both real and symbolic, physical and spiritual. The same dual truth can belong to the black night. Imagine for a moment that its orbit is not random, but chosen, not by alien hands perhaps, but by the quiet choreography of the universe itself. Space has its own poetry of motion, a rhythm that often appears deliberate when it's simply natural. Maybe the black night's mystery isn't in what it is, but in how it reminds us to look for meaning at all. When science tells us that something cannot be, and yet it is, that's where revelation begins. Every great discovery started as an impossibility. Every proven theory once sounded absurd. So perhaps it's not unscientific to wonder about the black night. Perhaps it's the purest form of curiosity, the same kind that has driven us from caves to constellations. There's a serenity in realizing that we don't have to choose between science and spirituality. We can admire the data and still dream of design. We can calculate orbits and still feel awe. The universe never asked us to pick one. It offers both freely. So as the black night drifts through its quiet path above Earth, it doesn't demand belief or disbelief. It simply is, a dark, reflective presence circling the planet, inviting us to pause, to breathe, to remember that knowledge and wonder can share the same sky. Maybe that's the bridge we've been searching for, not between humans and aliens, but between mind and spirit, between what we know and what we long to feel. As the night deepens, the stars seem to lean closer, and the earth hums softly beneath their gaze. Somewhere above, the black night continues its silent watch, a reminder that truth is not always about certainty. Sometimes it's about stillness, the kind that lets both the scientist and the dreamer find peace beneath the same stars. It is a strange comfort, isn't it, to imagine that we are not alone. Not in the fearful sense of invasion or surveillance, but in the quieter, almost sacred sense of companionship. That maybe somewhere in the endless hush of space, there is another consciousness watching, not with judgment, but with patience. A presence that has seen our wars and wonders, our progress and our pain, and still chooses to remain silent. When people speak of the black night, they often speak of mystery. But beneath that mystery lies something deeper, longing. A longing to be seen, to be acknowledged, to know that our existence matters in the grand expanse of the cosmos. It's a longing older than civilization itself, echoed in every prayer whispered to the sky and every telescope turned toward the stars. For some, the black night is a symbol of that connection, an emblem of the universe watching back. For others, it's a mirror, reflecting our own curiosity and restlessness. Whether it is technology, debris, or something beyond our comprehension, its meaning is shaped as much by our emotions as by our instruments. In moments of stillness, when the noise of the world fades and we find ourselves alone under the night sky, there's an undeniable pull upward. The stars, the moon, and the faint streak of satellites passing overhead. The black night, whatever it truly is, amplifies that feeling. It doesn't just orbit Earth. It orbits our imagination. Every theory about it, alien probe, Cold War artifact, ancient century, tells a story about us. We build explanations the way children build sandcastles, fragile, hopeful, trying to shape the unknown into something we can hold. And yet, the tide of mystery always returns, smoothing over the edges, reminding us that some questions are meant to stay open. If the black night is indeed a remnant of a lost civilization, then it speaks of endurance, that intelligence can outlive its creators, continuing to circle silently long after their voices fade. If it is alien, then it represents curiosity, that even across unimaginable distances, life seeks to know life. And if it's merely a piece of space debris, then perhaps its magic lies in coincidence, in how something so ordinary can inspire something so extraordinary in human thought. The universe, after all, has never promised us clarity. It gives us patterns and paradoxes, light and shadow, knowledge and uncertainty, all in equal measure. What we do with those gifts is what defines us. Some use them to calculate and categorize. Others use them to dream. Both are right. Both are necessary. There's a kind of poetic symmetry to the idea that something might be orbiting us, unseen, quietly watching over the species that has only just begun to lift its eyes from the dirt. It makes you think of how small we are, not in insignificance, but in humility. How much more there might be beyond the limits of our perception. Maybe that's what makes the Black Night story so haunting. It doesn't frighten us with monsters or invasions. It humbles us with perspective. It whispers that there are still mysteries left in the world, and that's something worth cherishing. In an age when data and discovery try to illuminate every corner of existence, we still need the dark, not as ignorance, but as wonder. For the dreamers, it's a symbol of infinite possibility. For the scientists, it's a challenge, yet unsolved. And for those lying awake beneath the quiet ceiling of stars, it's a lullaby, a reminder that there are still secrets orbiting just beyond our reach. Still questions that can only be answered by looking up. The Black Night might not carry messages or missions. Maybe it doesn't even notice us. But in thinking about it, in writing about it, in dreaming about it, we've given it purpose. We've made it part of our own story. And perhaps that is the true exchange between humanity and the unknown. Not evidence, not proof, but participation in something vast and eternal. It's beautiful to think that one object, drifting silently through the void, can make millions of minds pause and wonder, across continents, languages, and generations. The story has remained, changing shape, gaining color, merging myth and math into one seamless mystery. That endurance alone gives it a kind of truth that doesn't need verification. Because truth in its deepest form, isn't always about facts. Sometimes it's about resonance, the feeling that something means more than it should, that it belongs to a larger pattern we can almost sense but never quite define. The Black Night embodies that feeling, and so, as this chapter of reflection draws to a close, imagine the satellite above, turning slowly, silently, its surface glinting with cold light from a distant sun. It circles without noise or need, indifferent to our theories, our arguments, our fascination. Yet somehow it connects us all. In every heartbeat that wonders, in every eye that searches, in every whisper of awe beneath the night sky, it lives on, not as a machine, but as a mystery that unites science and soul. The universe may never confirm its purpose, but that's all right. Some stories aren't meant to end, they're meant to echo. And this one, the story of a dark object orbiting a bright world, continues to do just that in its orbit. We find reflection of our smallness, our brilliance, our hunger to know. In its silence, we find peace. And in its mystery, we find meaning, somewhere far above. The Black Night drifts through darkness, tracing the same quiet path it has for decades, maybe for centuries, watching, waiting, or perhaps simply being. And maybe that's all it was ever meant to do. There is a quiet hour, just before dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath. The stars dim, but the sun has not yet risen, and the sky feels like a vast mirror between two realities, one of dreams, the other of waking. It is in that stillness that the story of the Black Night satellite feels most alive, as if it belongs to the in-between places where mystery lingers and certainty fades, as Earth turns through that velvet silence. Somewhere above, the Black Night drifts unseen. No engines, no lights, no broadcast of intent, just a slow, unbroken orbit, tracing the same ancient path. In that motion there is a rhythm, like a heartbeat we cannot hear but somehow feel. It reminds us that even in the emptiness of space there is movement, purpose, and perhaps meaning. For centuries, humans have looked to the heavens, searching for gods, patterns, and answers. We mapped the stars before we mapped the oceans. We told stories about constellations before we built cities. The sky has always been our mirror, reflecting not only what is above us, but what is within us. And so, when an unexplained object appears in that sacred expanse, it becomes more than metal and orbit. It becomes a story, a question we can't stop asking. What is it that compels us to turn mystery into mythology? Maybe it's the same instinct that drives explorers into uncharted seas, the same curiosity that once made a species of dreamers reach for fire, for flight, for the stars. Every unknown is an invitation, a soft whisper asking, "Do you want to see what's beyond?" The Black Night has been that whisper for decades. Each new generation rediscovers it, attaches fresh meaning, reshapes its legend to fit the fears and hopes of its time. In the 1950s, it was seen as a Cold War specter, a spy satellite, perhaps hidden by rival nations. In the 1970s, it became a symbol of extraterrestrial technology, a remnant of civilizations older than memory. Today, it is a digital ghost, its image shared, debated, and reimagined through screens and stories that circle the globe just as it does. Yet, for all the noise and speculation, the object itself remains silent. That silence is perhaps its greatest power. In a world addicted to explanation, silence demands imagination. It forces us to slow down, to wonder without demanding an answer. Maybe that's why the Black Night endures, when so many other mysteries fade. It isn't just a story we tell. It's a story that listens. Think of how small we are beneath the cosmos. Our voices barely whispers against the hum of creation. And yet, through telescopes, antennas, and dreams, we reach outward. We send signals into the void, hoping someone or something might hear us. We are a species that fears loneliness more than darkness. So, when something mysterious circles us from above, it feels like a response, not in words, but in presence. Maybe the Black Night doesn't need to transmit anything. Maybe its silence is the message. A reminder that connection doesn't always come through noise or light. Sometimes it's found in shared stillness, in the simple act of being aware of one another's existence. There's beauty in that thought. The idea that across the vast, indifferent universe, two forms of life could simply acknowledge each other without intrusion. Just awareness, just orbit, just time. And yet, there is another layer to the story, one that feels both haunting and intimate. What if the Black Night is not a watcher at all, but a mirror of our own longing? What if, in projecting our myths onto it, we're really describing ourselves? We call it ancient because we crave history. We call it intelligent because we fear being alone. We call it alien because we need mystery to feel alive. Perhaps the Black Night exists not just above us, but within us, a symbol of the distance between what we know and what we dream. It's easy to forget that space, for all its vastness is not so far away, just a few hundred miles above our heads. Silent objects circle endlessly, satellites, stations, fragments of past missions. To think that among them might drift something older, something inexplicable, gives our sky a new kind of magic. The everyday becomes cosmic. The mundane becomes myth, as dawn begins to stretch its first light across the horizon. The stars retreat, and the satellite's shadow fades into the brightness of a new day. But even when we cannot see it, it remains there, faithful, eternal, and unbothered by the passing of time. Its path continues, looping around our planet like a secret thought that refuses to be forgotten. And maybe that is the real gift it gives us, the reminder that mystery doesn't need to be solved to be meaningful. Some things are meant to exist between knowing and dreaming, like a bridge connecting the human heart to the infinite. So, as the sky turns pale and the world begins to stir from sleep, imagine the Black Night still out there, gliding through the quiet dark, watching over a species that can't stop wondering, a species that builds rockets and myths, science and stories, all from the same yearning to reach beyond itself. The object remains unchanged, but we do not. Every generation that gazes upward adds another layer of meaning, another verse to the same silent song. And in that way, the Black Night is not just orbiting Earth, it is orbiting human destiny itself, a constant reminder that to be human is to search, to question, and to dream without end. There is a quiet kind of understanding that comes when you look at the stars long enough. It begins as curiosity, the innocent, childlike urge to know what's out there. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that curiosity deepens into something softer, a calm acceptance that maybe the mystery itself is the answer we were meant to find. When you think about it, everything we have ever built, our telescopes, our rockets, our myths, is an act of faith. We believe that the universe has something to show us. We believe that there is meaning beyond the veil of the visible. The Black Knight satellite embodies that faith. Whether it's a fragment of old technology or an ancient visitor, its orbit has become a symbol of our endless reaching. Imagine an ancient civilization, long before us, gazing up at the same night sky. Maybe they, too, saw an object move strangely among the stars and told stories about it. Maybe that same mysterious presence has been circling Earth since before our ancestors discovered fire, a silent witness to our evolution from wanderers to watchers of the heavens. The thought is humbling, to realize that something could have been here before us, observing, waiting, unchanging, while entire civilizations rose and fell below. The Black Knight becomes, then, not just an artifact of alien technology, but a time capsule of cosmic memory. Some astronomers say what people see is simply space debris, the remains of a lost mission, caught in orbit and misunderstood. Others insist the object's trajectory and endurance defy such simple explanations. But perhaps the truth doesn't matter. Perhaps the power of the Black Knight lies not in what it is, but in what it means to us. Because, in a way, every mystery humanity encounters reflects the same unspoken question: what are we doing here? Why this planet? This fragile sphere of oceans and light, surrounded by an infinity of silence? Why a species capable of such beauty and destruction, curiosity and fear? When we stare at the Black Knight through telescopes or screens, we are really staring into that question, a question older than language, older than time, and yet there's comfort in that shared search. Each of us, in our own way, is a little satellite, orbiting the unknown, carrying fragments of stories, dreams. Our paths cross, our signals intertwine, and for brief moments, we connect before drifting again into the quiet of our own orbits. Perhaps that's what the universe has been showing us all along. That connection, not certainty, is what gives life meaning. Listen now, for a moment, to the silence around you. That silence is not empty. It hums with the distant music of the cosmos, the vibration of stars being born, the faint echoes of forgotten worlds, the slow turning of invisible things. The same quiet rhythm that guides the Black Knight's orbit guides your own heartbeat. We are part of the same system, bound not just by gravity, but by wonder. And in that realization, something inside us begins to soften. The fear of not knowing becomes peace. The mystery becomes home. The Black Knight satellite, whether alien or earthly, myth or truth, becomes a kind of cosmic lullaby, a reminder that we are surrounded by things we cannot fully understand. And that's all right. Some stories are meant to remain open, their endings unwritten, their meanings infinite, because if the mystery ever vanished completely, what would become of our dreams? Without questions, without awe, the universe would become smaller, and so would we. As the final hours of the night fade, the world begins to wake again. The sky brightens to silver, clouds catching the first whispers of dawn. The stars retreat into their daytime invisibility, and somewhere above, the Black Knight continues its ancient circuit, unseen but still there, silent, steady, eternal, and maybe, just maybe, It's watching us, not with the cold detachment of a machine, but with the quiet curiosity of something that understands what it means to wonder. So tonight, when you look up at the sky, remember, you are part of that same story. You are orbiting too, not just around the sun, but around possibility itself. And as you drift into sleep, let that thought cradle you, that we are not alone in our questions, not alone in our longing, and not alone in this endless, beautiful mystery that binds all things together. The stars will keep their secrets for now. The black night will keep its silence, and the universe, vast, unknowable, and breathtaking, will keep turning, waiting for the next dreamer to look up and whisper, "I see you."